Hey everyone, welcome to our second session of Membership 101. We're so thrilled that you're here and able to join us. Today we're going to focus on making the case for membership to your potential members and audience research. And so I encourage you to follow along and ask questions in the Ask a Question section and participate in the chat. Like always, we'll be recording this and sending out notes and the recording and a transcript on Monday, so check your email inbox for that. And now I'm going to turn it over to Ariel Zoronik, who will lead us moving forward.
Thanks. And yes, you'll bring the slides up on the screen?
Yes, as soon as I figure out how to do that. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for joining us today, and thanks to those of you who joined us for office hours this week. This session is probably my favorite of all the sort of building blocks of membership because it is so much fun to get to know your audience members and experiment with ways to tell your stories with them. And so to kind of get us in that member mindset, I want to start with a little bit of an open question to everyone here. Before we start thinking about our journalism and our audiences, I want you to think about the experience that you have as a member. So if we can take maybe 2 minutes right here at the top, think about an organization of which you're a member, not a news organization, but something else. Maybe it's your church or other religious organization. Maybe it's a running club of some kind. Maybe it's a book club. Think about something you're a member of and answer the following questions. You can answer them for yourself, but I'd also love if you drop them in the chat. Why did you join this organization? Why is this membership valuable to you? And what keeps you around? What keeps you from canceling your membership, or if it's free, what keeps you continuing to attend meetings, continuing to participate? So we'll take a beat and let folks think on this, and would love it if you drop some of your answers in the chat.
Don't be shy.
And I'll say, while we wait for people to, maybe it takes a minute to write things down, I'll say that the one that I often think about is the running club that I was a part of before I moved away from Miami, my hometown. I joined the running club because I wanted to get better at running, and it was really boring trying to get better doing it alone. And the membership was valuable to me because it helped me level up, and it gave me encouragement on days that I was lagging or didn't really feel like doing it. And what kept me around is the community that built around it. When I ran marathons that others from the club were in, people were cheering me on. There was somebody waiting at the finish line. And so it felt like I wasn't doing this very solitary sport very alone. Gym membership, health reason. That is one that we hear a lot. Carrie, what organization are you referencing when you say you believe this organization can make an impact in the community? Squeeze massage membership. Join for the discounts and superior customer experience. I say subscribe due to the customer service and satisfaction with the service. That's a great lesson in retention. If the service stays at a high quality, you're more likely to stick around. Greg, tell me a little bit about more your local public radio station membership. Why is it valuable to you to be a member of your local public radio station? Sorry, put you on the spot there. There you go, Greg. Okay, well, it's a little bit hard with the typing and we can't unmute everybody. But the reason we wanted to start off with this question is because the whole purpose of this session is to sort of put yourself in your member's shoes, or to help think more like your audience members and less like the journalist that is trying to get audience members to financially support your organization. And so anytime you're having trouble sort of connecting the dots, it can be helpful to sort of think back to this, think back to what it feels like when you are a member of an organization, what prompts you to financially support it, what prompts you to maybe throw a little bit of extra money to support them, or what prompts you to maybe volunteer to help the organization grow or have a better impact. Next slide. Before we get going today, I know we have quite a few people that are joining us live for the first time today. So I just wanted to reiterate just a couple of points about how the course is going to go. As Yossi mentioned, the sessions are being recorded. At the bottom right of your screen, you will see something that says ask a question. If you have a question, please use that. It'll help us sort of keep track of all of the questions as we go through the session. We have office hours every Tuesday from 2 to 3 p.m. We are going to focus on answering questions during the session that have broad applicability to the participants. If you have a question that's very specific to your organization, I'd encourage you to take the opportunity to join the office hours on Tuesday. There's homework after each class. It's obviously optional, but it's helpful. And if you want to make sure that you get all of these resources after the class, you should make sure to add membership at lenfestinstitute.org to your contacts to make sure it doesn't go to spam. That is where we're sending the recordings, the transcript, my slides with all of the links that we'll be sharing throughout the class, as well as some additional resources that can help you go further than what we talked about today. The other thing that we are doing to get to some of the questions, we had so many last class that we couldn't get to, is we put up a discussion on membershipguide.org where we will be picking a few more of the questions we don't have time to get to and answering them in writing. So I will each Monday or Tuesday, as we sort of go through the resources from the class, I will throw up answers to a few more of the questions that come in. So again, there's two places that you will be able to get your questions answered other than during the live session, which we'll have some question breaks for, and that is office hours. And then also you should check the discussions page periodically to see if your question gets answered there. I also encourage you, this is set up sort of Reddit style, so you can comment on other people's questions, you can share your own experiences. So would love if you went to the discussions page, and if you have follow-up questions to what is being shared there, or you have experiences that you think will be useful for other people, to please go ahead and drop them there. All you need to do to create an account is have a LinkedIn account, and it syncs that way. So it's super seamless and easy. And Rodney is going to drop the link to that discussion page in the chat. Last week, we ended the session with a talk about the process of identifying your membership gaps. I was curious if there is anybody here who has taken a stab at doing this exercise yet and would be up for sharing one of the gaps that they have identified through working on this worksheet. It can be something quite small, like we haven't yet surveyed our audience, but would love to hear if there's anybody here who has identified one of their gaps yet and would be open to sharing that. I know it's a little tough having to type, but Omar, thank you. Tech was a gap for us. Is there something specific technologically that you realize that you're missing? Or is it more that you haven't yet had a chance to audit what you've got? Okay, V, lack of an audience. Paywall. So Omar, you are looking for, you are realizing that you need to change something about your tech stack in order to implement a paywall more effectively, I think I'm understanding. That's great. That's a great thing to identify with the gap. And I hope that you're using the worksheet to figure out maybe how much time you need in order to close that gap, maybe who needs to be in the meetings about how to address that gap. Sudeshna, thank you. That's great. Knowledge about audience loyalty and conversion probability was a gap. That's really, really important. Thank you, Kim. Can we explain membership to our audience members? Not yet. Well, you're in luck because that is what today is going to be almost entirely about. Shafiq, tech was a gap technologically and developing it into conceptuality. Great. Articulate the value proposition. Awesome. That is the second half of today's session. So John, you are in luck. Thank you. I'm so glad that so many people have sat down with this sheet. I encourage you to kind of keep the gaps worksheet with you as we go through the course, because as we get deeper into each of the topics, each of those sort of 9 readiness questions, you'll begin to get a little bit more detail about what those gaps are and what steps you could take to address it. So thank you so much for everybody who has chimed in already and who spent some time on their own or with their teams going through that this week. So glad that it sounds like it's been helpful. Next slide. So today is going to be, we're going to start by talking about some basic ways to conduct audience research to inform the design of the membership program. And then we will get, after that, we will have the Richland Source join us to talk about how they tell their story, and then we'll get into value proposition work. The first thing to know about audience research is, why does it matter? I've been in many conversations where audience research has sort of been talked about as this good karma thing that you maybe do to make yourself feel good, to make your audience members feel good, but they're not really sure what the point of it is. Audience research is incredibly, incredibly useful, particularly for resource-strapped organizations. It will help you use your resources more effectively by understanding what is worth investing in. It will help you make things that people actually want. probably many of the people on this chat, myself included, have sometimes created something without conducting audience research and then seen that virtually no one ends up using it, or it really misses the mark. Audience research helps reduce the likelihood of that happening. To that end, audience research can also help reduce the number of things you have to try before you get something right. There's this sort of constant iteration process when you're developing new products, including a membership program, of sort of putting something out there in the world, seeing what people respond to, and then iterating on it from there. The number of times you have to put something out there and observe people's responses before you get to something that really works, you can reduce the number of tries if you conduct audience research first. And I hope what you take away from this the most is that audience research makes this work, this audience-centric editorial product development work, it makes it less of a guessing game. I know the feeling of sort of sitting behind your computer and trying to figure out what is going to work and sort of feeling like this is a process of throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. But if you do audience research, even just a survey before you go down this path, you can really reduce that feeling of feeling like you're just guessing at what your audience is going to respond to. And the other thing that I really appreciate about audience research is that it is a really simple way of sort of taking baby steps into the process of inviting your audience members to participate in your work. The simplest way to invite participation is to ask your audience members a question and invite them to tell you what they want in exchange. It can be in the form of a survey, it can be in the form of a focus group, but this is the way that many organizations begin to step into that process of audience participation. Next slide. And another thing to kind of keep in mind as we talk about why audience research is important, I'm going to bring you back to the sort of human-centered design framework that many of you here are probably aware of. And in order to create true innovation, you need to have the product needs to be desirable, it needs to be feasible, and it needs to be viable. And at the center of that is innovation. And so what we're basically going to talk about today is how to create a desirable product. Useful, desirable products are what build habit and loyalty. This is what is going to help you address that sort of loyal audience gap that you are thinking about. And it's habit and loyalty that will bring the audience members closer to your newsroom and eventually turn some of them into members. Audience research will help you collect feedback, assess membership satisfaction, and adapt to your changing needs along the way. Without audience research, your newsroom decisions are going to be made on flawed premises, such as newsroom hierarchy, maybe the highest ranking person in the conversation's opinion, for example, and the personal life experiences of the journalists in the room. We know, particularly after the year that we've had, that most of our newsrooms are not fully representative of the communities that we serve. And so audience research is particularly critical for making sure that the life experiences of your staff do not end up informing the final product more than the life experiences of the audience members that you are existing to serve. And to sort of underscore that point that we can make this less of a guessing game, I wanted to surface 3 questions that I did not answer last week. And the reason I did not answer them is because I don't know your audiences and I don't know your editorial focus. And so I was not going to throw out a guess about what would work for your audiences. But these are 3 questions that you could answer within your organization through audience research. One example that I'll throw out here and dig into a little bit more is that that question about whether a loyalty program or a membership program would resonate more. And Jackie, I detailed an answer to that question on the discussions page that we linked earlier. But what I will say is that audience research can tell you which of these might work better. If you survey your audience members about what benefits they would value most, I would encourage you to pay attention to whether the benefits that they say they would value most seem more transactional, like discounts, early access, VIP access, exclusivity, that kind of thing. Or if you are seeing people sort of saying that they value the benefits that are mission-driven or cause-driven, like the opportunity to get to know your reporters better, the opportunity to participate in your journalism, maybe the opportunity to volunteer with your newsroom. That latter group of benefits indicates that they want more of a membership relationship. But if they say that they value discounts, special experiences, VIP access, that tells you that they maybe want more of a loyalty program, which we think of sort of a monetary exchange in both directions. Next question. When you shouldn't do audience research. I don't want to imply that audience research is exactly the answer for every scenario that your organization might encounter. There are many times when an A/B test would work better. Maybe you're wondering what's the right send time for your newsletter. You could send a survey to your audience members asking what time they would prefer to get the newsletter, but you're actually going to get a better answer if you just look at what time your newsletter is presently being open, or you split your list into 2 blocks and send it at 2 different times and see which time works better. So that's an example of an A/B test, and when an A/B test is going to be a better choice than a survey or a focus group. Another time that we've seen people use audience research in less useful manner is when they're trying to actually just collect praise for the work that they're doing. That is something different. That is asking for testimonials. This is also very useful, but you want audience research that tells you things that are not working for your audience members as well. And so it's important to go into audience research with the mindset of getting feedback on what you should be doing better. Another really important consideration is doing audience research only when you have the capacity to use the findings and have a plan to use the findings. There is survey fatigue is a real thing. It is very important that you do not sort of abuse your audience members' enthusiasm or willingness to engage with your organization. You want to make sure that when you send the survey out, you have a plan for using the information that you're getting back, because you want them to be able to see the value of taking the time to answer the survey. And the last thing is not using audience research when you're making cross-departmental decisions. The other way to put this is sort of don't use your audience members as tiebreakers. So if you're having a sort of internal disagreement about where to go, we would discourage you from sending out a survey just to break a tie within your organization on an organizational goal. And actually, Yossi, can we go back one slide? Because I forgot to make, I think, one pretty important point. There's one point that I think we actually skipped this slide, and that's why I didn't say it. One of the most important things here is to always do your audience research in connection with an organizational goal. And that organizational goal might be, we are assessing whether our audience members would be interested in a membership program. Maybe we want to understand why open rates are declining on our main newsletter. Maybe we're trying to decide what beats are sort of most valued by our audience members so we can decide where to bring some more experimental storytelling to. But you should always conduct audience research with a particular goal in mind. Another thing that's really important to think about is what assumptions you're going into audience research with. And I would encourage you to sit down with your team or anybody who's sort of involved in this audience research process and think about those assumptions and write each of those assumptions down on a piece of paper and then put them aside. And when you are receiving the data, when you're going through the process of reading through the survey responses or reading through your interview notes, I would encourage you to keep those assumptions sort of just off to the side so you can catch yourself when you're sort of letting those assumptions override what you're seeing in the data. And so it's really important to spend a little bit of time of identifying those assumptions so that you don't let them color the feedback when you're coming back. And the last one that I'll mention before we move forward, and this is actually Miriam asked this question in last week's chat, which is how many people should be surveyed to get a clear idea of what people want and don't want. And so I have a potentially less than satisfying answer to that, but you want to make sure that you collect responses until clear patterns begin to emerge. And it really depends on what the topic at hand is and whether you're doing this versus in a survey or an interview format, how many that is. In an interview format, you often begin to see those patterns relatively early on, starting say around like interview number 7, because you're getting so deep into their behavior. When we're talking surveys, you want to make sure that you're getting to the point where you're seeing a sort of like strong note in favor of one of the questions that you're asking. You could also set some percentage benchmarks. Maybe you're hoping to convert 10% of your newsletter list into paying members. So maybe you say, let's aim for getting 10% response rate on our survey. But I would say instead of focusing on the number of, I would say rather than focusing on the number of surveys that you receive, thinking about, have I gotten enough information to achieve the goal of the audience research? And so that's going to be fairly specific to each situation. And we can go forward. Yes, choosing an audience research method. So this is going to be a very sort of brief overview because the audience research section of the membership guide goes into this much more in depth. But generally speaking, you might choose surveys when you need a large or geographically distributed sample, more so than you need really detailed information about your audience members. Maybe you have a sort of work in progress thing at hand and you need some very quick specific feedback before you can move forward. A survey is definitely the best bet. And sometimes when you need quantitative data, like you want to know like what percentage of your members would prefer X and what percentage would prefer Y. These are situations when surveys are more important. And yes, to Rodney's point, I see a lot of questions in the chat. We are not going to be able to go through the questions that are showing up in the chat. If you have a question, please make sure to use the Ask a Question button in the bottom right, which will help Rodney sort of sift through the questions and will help me answer any lingering ones in the discussions tab after the session. You're going to want to choose focus groups and interviews when you need to dig in and understand habits, motivations, or attitudes amongst your audience members. This is a lot of like, I feel, or I think, or this evokes this reaction in me. If those are the kinds of answers that you're hoping to get, you're going to probably want to skew more towards interviews or focus groups. When you need new ideas, so the sort of free-flowing nature of focus groups or interviews can reveal to you new lines of inquiry that weren't even in mind. And so if you are sort of like trying to get a feel for where you should take, say, your very nascent membership program, maybe a focus group among some of your earliest members might be useful because you don't know what to even begin to ask them questions about. So a focus group or an interview might be better in that scenario. Focus groups and interviews are also preferable when you need to be very intentional about who you get feedback from. With a survey, you can't really control that much who decides to reply, but with an interview or focus group, you can be much more careful about how you sort of recruit for the focus groups or interviews. Many organizations will start by issuing a survey with some big picture questions and then collecting some demographic information and concluding that survey with a question such as, would you be open to an interview or focus group to discuss this further? Please let us know if so. And so that could be a way that you begin to build a more representative sort of focus group or set of interview such sources by using the demographic data that you have there. Thanks. So the rest of the session today is going to be about what are the types of audience data that can inform your membership strategy. Audience research should probably be undertaken at every stage of your organization. So you're going to want to maybe do some of this before you start your big voter guide effort. You're going to want to do it maybe before you sort of invest in a new event strategy. But today we're going to talk about what are the types of information that you need to know about your audience members to launch or sort of refine and iterate on your existing membership strategy. So here are some of the things that you're going to want to know. Some of them are familiar probably from last week's session. You want to know their willingness and ability to support you financially. This can be kind of an uncomfortable thing to ask. You maybe don't want to tip your hand. What if they say that they aren't willing to support me financially? But it's really important that you have a sense of this before you invest your resources there. You're going to want to know what they value about your work. And that is not just like the sort of overall value that they provide to your community, that you provide to their community, for example, but do they value your newsletters most? Do they value your website most, your podcast? Maybe there are particular beats or particular reporters that really resonate with them. Those are important things to know before you go down this path. You also want to know how they access your work. So you want to get a sense of sort of their behavior and how they engage on it. So you want to know, do they start their day by reading your newsletter and then go to your website later in the day? Do they check your homepage every morning? Do they listen to your podcast on their drive to work? You want to sort of understand the habits around how they access your work so you can make it as accessible as possible. You're also going to want to know what their unmet information and community needs are, and this can tip you off to sort of some voids that you could really quickly gain traction by seeking to fill. You want to know what would make the membership experience valuable for them. And so this is different from what they value about the journalism you're producing, but why would they want to engage more heavily? What would make that worth their time, worth their money, worth their energy to engage? And another thing that is often really telling, and I have found really useful in my own work, is knowing what other causes and communities they support. So asking this question can give you a sense of what types of sort of community engagement your audience members have other than with journalism. It can also point you to really solid partnership opportunities in your community. So maybe you hear over and over and over again that your audience members are also a member of this like social organization, your community. That tips you off to sort of forging a partnership with them and how that could potentially add value to the membership experience or help you recruit new members. Slide. And so the first type of audience research that you might undertake in this scenario is a membership viability assessment. And this is usually done among organizations that don't yet have a membership program. And the goal here is to assess whether your audience members are willing to give you financial support, and if yes, why. So the questions you're going to ask around that are things like, would you be willing to support us on a recurring basis? If so, how much would you be willing to give? What other causes and organizations do you support, potentially with how much? What work of ours do you find most valuable? Another way to sort of assess whether membership is viable for your organization, and this is one that News Revenue Hub uses quite often, is using a Net Promoter Score survey. An NPS survey, which I'll talk about a little bit more in depth later, is one simple question. It is, how likely are you to recommend this product or service to your friend or colleague on a scale of 1 to 10? And if you are getting a score, an average score from your audience members of 7 or above, that indicates that you have a strong, what they call promoter contingency. And that indicates that you have a potentially like fertile ground for membership amongst your audience members. And one really great example of a membership viability assessment comes from the Daily Maverick in South Africa. And I think I brought this case study up last week, but in a different vein. And here I'm going to focus instead on the questions that they asked after they ran their one-time donations drive. And this is probably particularly useful for many of you in the room who likely ran a donations campaign around coronavirus, as you maybe saw your advertising revenue crater, or maybe you're participating in Newsmatch right now. And so you're getting this whole new group of donors that could potentially become your future members. So the Daily Maverick, they did a donations drive. And then at the end of the donations drive, they had a group of about 1,200 people that had supported the Daily Maverick financially, and they surveyed them on their on sort of their reasons for financially supporting the Daily Maverick and what motivated them to do that. You can see here on the screen some of the questions that they asked. They sent a pretty extensive survey. I think it was about 20 questions long, but here are some of the ones that stuck out to me the most. And in the, Rodney will drop in a link in the chat, the case study to the Daily Maverick. What I want to point you to is who they targeted this to. They sent it to the people who'd already donated to them before. So like the most loyal of loyal audience members. And they chose to do that because they knew that this group was quite likely to spend the time to answer a 20 or 25 question survey. So it's important when you're designing your surveys to think about who the survey is going to and how long they're going to be willing to spend on that. If you're blasting the survey out to your entire audience, you're going to want to keep it a lot shorter. You're going to want to keep it like 7 or 8 minutes long. You're going to want to do a fairly limited number of open-ended questions because you want to reduce the friction. You want to make it easy for them to participate. But if you're designing a membership program, you might find it much more useful to target that ask to a much smaller but much more intensely supportive group of people so that you can get into the depth of the questions that the Daily Maverick did. And in the case study, they were really, really helpfully transparent with us. You'll find all of the questions that they asked. And you'll also, if I remember correctly, you'll find the answers to the vast majority of those questions. So you can see sort of how their audience replied, and then how they designed the membership program eventually in response. The next type of assessment that you might be doing, and this would be for those of you in the group who already have a membership program, but are maybe not sure what you should be doubling down on. Maybe you're wondering if all of your benefits are popular, or maybe you're seeing waning engagement amongst your members and you're wondering what's up. So at MPP, we recommend at this stage, this is when we most often recommend a Net Promoter Score survey, with the goal of finding out how satisfied they are with their membership experience. And so that question would be, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend membership to your newsroom, to a friend or colleague? And you should also offer an option to elaborate on their score. So they have that 1 through 10 ranking, and then you have the opportunity to offer additional feedback there. And I would say at this stage, the lightest lift is just asking that question and seeing the score. If you're trending below a 7 on member satisfaction with their member experience, that's a bit of a red flag that you should be digging into that further and understanding why your most intensely supportive audience members, or the people who are meant to be your most intensely supportive audience members, are not giving you a really positive score. So that in and of itself is useful data, but you could also reach out to everybody who scores you below a 7 to find out what you can do better. And this is something that we did at my previous company, The Nootropic. Anybody who gave us an NPS score below 7 on our daily morning newsletter, which was our flagship product, we sent them a personal email from our email address, not a form response, and said, we saw that you weren't so happy with your experience. Do you have a bit of time to tell us what would make it better for you? And sometimes we didn't get an answer back. I mean, if somebody gave us a score of a 2, they were pretty unlikely to answer us. They're already pretty dissatisfied. But occasionally we had a really successful interview with somebody who gave us really helpful feedback on, say, our tone, or maybe the sort of mix of news stories that we were bringing together. So that's a really helpful sort of medium lift level on the membership satisfaction question. And the other way that you could sort of assess their satisfaction with the membership program at this stage is, I'm actually going to steal a tip from Steady, which is a membership platform in Germany. And they encourage the people that are using their tool to periodically ask their members what benefits are most impactful. And they ask them very specifically, what benefit do you find the most valuable? And what benefit do you find the least valuable? And the reason they do that is they say that rankings are actually incredibly unhelpful. They used to have people rank in order the benefits, and they said that it got really squishy towards the end. People weren't really sure if something was the 5th least valuable benefit or the 6th least valuable benefit, but asking just the most valuable and just the least valuable gave them really useful data, and it also increased their response rates because it was an easier question for people to answer, and it took them less time. And one small point about that is that you should include the list of benefits with that question when you ask them. Because if you're asking people to talk about what benefit they find least valuable, they likely don't even remember that that benefit exists. So you need to provide the list so that they can remember that and note that one is the one that they are potentially not even really engaging with. And the last one, this is sort of the highest level type of audience research that you might conduct among your existing members. And this is when you know your members are satisfied. If this is, you have a membership program, you have a pretty strong satisfaction score, and so you know people are happy. And now you want to understand the sort of most loyal of your loyal audience members. What are their underlying motivations for supporting you? And this will help you identify those appropriate participation opportunities for inviting them to get more engaged in the organization. This is sort of when you're going to need probably an interview or a focus group, because you're going to want to really dig into those sort of squishier areas about like how their participation in your organization makes them feel, how it adds value to their experience within the community. And so that could include questions such as, what organizations do you presently participate in? Are you involved with any news organizations as a participant? How do you participate? And you could give them drop-down options. Like, I comment, I share stories, I've been a source, I've contributed tips or story ideas, I donate. You could ask them, what do you value in your membership to our organization or in memberships more broadly? And we have a sort of MPP member value survey that you could use. You'll get that link when you get these slides on Monday. And this lists all the types of values that we've sort of heard people in user research interviews indicate to us as things that they find value about in membership. You could use that survey to sort of understand what people value about their membership in your organization. Or you could sort of riff on that survey and add some of your own member experiences there. So this is definitely the highest level option. You don't go and get into this part unless you know that you have a satisfied audience and you know what people value about your organization already. This gets into their motivations for participation, their motivations for engaging. And this is when you find the opportunities to, say, invite someone to become an ambassador, or invite someone to help co-host an event, or invite them to help you design your election coverage. This is when you really get into that sort of those memberful routines, which we'll be speaking about next week. And the last step in this process of audience research is synthesis. This is the process of identifying the patterns in the audience research data so that you can act on them, sort of finding the insights amid the data. This is a more complex process than is really viable to get into a sort of classroom setting like this, but we have a really detailed sort of step-by-step process, very approachable step-by-step synthesis process in the membership guide. And so all I'll really say here is that you should never skip on the synthesis process. We've talked to a number of organizations who send out their survey or conduct their like 7 or 10 interviews or conduct their focus group. And then they just sit down and start tearing through the responses and then like putting those on sticky notes on the wall. That if you skip that process of finding the patterns amongst that answer, you'll quickly be swimming in really noisy data that makes it really hard to actually find the things that you can act on. And so you're going to have a million different points. You won't have found the connective tissue between all of those points. And it'll be really hard to apply that against. And Kim, all of this is in the membership guide, and all of this will be in the slides that I'm sending out on Monday. We're trying not to overwhelm people with too many links during the session so that people can sort of be engaged with the presentation, but we will have all the information available after. And with the synthesis, one way to sort of think about getting started is to return to the original question you had about your audience, the purpose that you undertook this audience research for in the first place, and think about what data is going to give you the answer to that. So that can tell you what parts of the interview to pay the most attention to, what survey questions to pay the most attention to, that kind of thing. So again, we'll link to the sort of step-by-step synthesis process in the slides, and you'll get those slides on Monday morning with everything here. You could also proactively go and find it in the audience research section of the membership guide. And the last thing that I will share here to sort of ground that connection between conducting a survey and then finding actionable insights and the answer to that survey is what insights the Daily Maverick derived from the survey that I shared with you before. So here are a few of the actionable insights that they got there that they were able to incorporate in the design of their membership program. For one, the survey confirmed that their one-time donors were really excited about the idea of offering recurring support and becoming a part of the Daily Maverick community in exchange. That was an overwhelming response from that survey. They surveyed people about what potential benefits they would find most useful. And from that, they found that mission-aligned benefits, such as an insider newsletter and a chance to get to know the journalists on the Daily Maverick team, were much more appealing than special offers and discounts. One funny anecdote that they shared with us, that I always love to share, is they were convinced that people were really going to want swag as part of their membership experience. And so before they even got the results back from the survey, they ordered a couple hundred Daily Maverick hoodies. And then when they sent out the survey asking what benefits people most wanted, swag was like the last or the second to last benefit of all the ones that they threw out there as potential benefits. And so they were sitting there with a couple hundred fairly expensive hoodies that it turned out that people didn't really want. And so they had to find a way to sort of make that a value add to the membership program. And I think they used it as an incentive at their membership launch party. If you join tonight, you get a free Daily Maverick hoodie. But they had invested in something with it before they conducted the survey. And that was a little bit of like egg on the face. The other thing they found is that their investigative reporting was the strongest driver of financial support. So one of the questions that they asked people is, what coverage most enticed you to support our work? That is how they figured that out, that investigative reporting was this. And then they also got a sense of how much money people were going to be willing to support. Thanks. I am a little bit over time. That took a little bit more than I anticipated. So let's just take 2 quick questions now, and we'll save some more time for questions at the end. Rodney, you want to throw me a question from the group?
Yeah, of course. We had 2 on the same topic from, I think, John and Gabrielle, asking, how do you conduct research if you haven't even launched yet, if you're planning to launch an organization with a membership program?
That's a great question. Actually, I saw that Shay Totten is here with the Compass experiment. We actually have a case study in the membership guide on how the Compass experiment conducted audience research in Ohio before they launched Mahoning Matters. They worked with the, Shay can correct me if I'm misremembering, but I believe that they worked with the local library to recruit people to do a series of focus groups to understand sort of people's general understanding of why you should pay for news and what type of information and news provision would be most valuable to the residents of Ohio. So we have a case study on exactly how they did that process in the membership guide, and we can make sure to put that in the post-class resources.
Great.
And the other thing I'll mention,
Yeah,
I'll just mention one more thing about that, which is that one of our researchers on the membership guide, Emily Roseman, created what we are calling the Audience Research Compass, and it's a series of questions about the status of membership at your organization. that will help you decide on the right type of audience research question and the right type of questions, the right type of audience research method and the right questions to ask. So that will be in the post-class resources. And it's a series of sort of questions about whether you have membership already or you're considering it. Do you have an existing audience? Or are you just getting started, like John mentioned? So that will help sort of guide you to the right way to design audience research based on your status. And I think we might, I can drop the link in there while Jay Allred is presenting.
Do you want to pull Jay up, or do you want another question?
Let's do one more question really quickly, because I think the second half of this will go a little bit more quickly.
Okay. Someone asked, and I think you've covered this somewhat, but best practices for audience research, especially for cash-strapped organizations. Yossi put a link in. I put a link into a book as well, but are there other things you'd like to highlight to do research on a tiny budget?
I think optimizing for maybe surveys over interviews or focus groups, thinking about you can partner with other organizations who might have the same information needs as you, and therefore you can share resources to conduct the audience research. Maybe your local library also wants to understand sort of news literacy and information gaps in the community. So I'd say look to partners if you can, and if not, there are a few different ways that you can sort of automate audience research, and those are detailed in both the audience research compass that will be sent around and also in the audience research section of the membership guide. What are some of the ways you can sort of automate the process of audience research with like surveys that go out automatically, surveys on your unsubscribe page, that kind of thing. We even have a single person audience research section in the single person audience research process in the membership guide that y'all will find.
Nice.
Now we'll make sure the link is made available.
Okay. So you'll get that on Monday.
Right.
There's a couple comments, people just saying there's so much information, which is true. Just want to repeat, you'll get a nice fat email on Monday with the deck, recording, and all kinds of links. So not that you shouldn't be paying attention and taking notes now, but you don't have to scribble everything down at this point.
Yeah. Okay. And one thing before we bring up the Richland source that I want to talk about a few things that you should be paying attention to as Jay presents. And that is, back in 2018, when MPP was sort of really getting its research underway, we realized that while membership in news was quite new outside of the public radio space, membership had worked very well in many spaces beyond news for a very long time. And so we sent out a team of researchers to study other member-driven movements. So we studied churches, we studied environmental cooperatives, we studied Burning Man, open source communities, all to sort of understand what motivated people to give their time, expertise, and money to things that they didn't have to in order to experience the benefit of it. And there are three things that really stand out to me in the vein of telling your story. First is that there's really deep value in being fascinated with what your members value. And you'll see that in Jay's presentation. We just talked about how to learn what your audience members value about your organization. But journalists really need to figure out how to sort of apply a modicum of our fascination with issues, with politicians, with government organizations, apply just a little bit of that passion, that fascination to our audience members as well. And you'll see that pay dividends. Another important thing is that the most inspiring member-driven movements beyond news, they succeeded when they sold more than a product or a cause. They found a way to connect individuals to a shared larger purpose. They found a way to say, if you become a member of our organization, here's how you're contributing to the greater good of this thing that we know that you really care about. So finding that connection point is really important. And the last thing is that we are in this moment in time in which a lot of things in the world feel very broken. And people are really paralyzed by the fact that they can't figure out how to fix it themselves. It just feels, the problem feels too big, it feels too sticky, it feels too complicated. So those organizations that find a way to frame membership to their organization as one way to restore what feels broken in the world, develop these really sticky, sort of passionate membership relationships. And so I encourage you to look for these three things as Jay presents on how the Richland source tells its story. And I will, in the Monday resources, we'll be sending out that research report that digs into these things, like connecting to a shared larger purpose and restoring what feels broken, and how places beyond news have found ways to do it. I think you'll find it to be a really inspiring report. And yeah, let's bring Jay up.
All right. Thank you, Ariel. Thanks for having me, everybody. So my name's Jay Allred. I'm so glad to be here working with you at the Rev Lab and with the Membership Puzzle Project. And I want to talk with you a little bit about our company and how we tell our story to our readers. But some of you, there's 184 people here. So I'm certain that some of you don't know me. So who is this guy? I'm the guy in charge at Source Media, and I've had a life around news, a career in digital technology. I've been involved in 6 different startups in both news and technology. On the journalism side, the Source Media group gets about 500,000 users a month, 3 million page views. We've got 15 employees, and I have 1 wife, 2 kids, and 2 dogs. But really, bottom line, we're really very fortunate. We have a great team. They are, thanks, Yossi's. We have a great team and a community that supports our organization. We've tried to build a very entrepreneurial and a results-driven culture. We're covering about 200,000 people. You'll see from us, there's really a deep commitment on our team to solutions journalism and reader engagement. We'll talk about that a little bit more as we move along here. We lean really hard into the region that we cover. When people ask us what our media bias is, we just basically tell them that we're pro-Ohio. And Our View from Somewhere, which is the book that I'm in the middle of, and just Lewis Raven Wallace, I think, wrote that book, and I'm in the middle of it, and it's just fantastic. But our view tends to be standing next to our readers and looking at problems from their vantage point. But today, and we can go to the next slide now, today we're going to talk about marketing, and we are going to talk a little bit about sales. And I know that that's going to feel a little bit uncomfortable sometimes, and I promise that I'm not going to make you feel gross, but I am sorry, but you will live, because it's really important. Because what we're going to talk about is how you tell your story to the readers and what position you place yourself in that story. So if you want to move to the next slide, Yossi. The big, huge question that we have to ask ourselves, I'm going to walk you through, is, are you the hero or the guide? And in the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through a methodology our marketing agency, Source Brand Solutions, uses to help clients identify their story so that their customers, and in this case, your customers, your members, can see their role in it. The power of narrative is really hardwired into the way people understand themselves and their world. And the more clearly that you express your story to your customer, the less effort it takes for your customer to understand it. And that's what you want them to do, right? You want them to see themselves in your story, and they want you to see your company in theirs. And the key here is for you to create a scenario or a story that takes very little effort for them to understand and that they can see themselves in easily. The farther the customer goes into your story, the farther they move through your narrative, the more likely they are to commit to you and become a member. But first, we have to answer this big, huge question. And I really want you to think about your answer as journalists or people who run journalism organizations, because we're going to get back to this in terms of where we are. So let's go to the next slide, and let's just imagine that your reader asks you a perfectly reasonable question, right? Why should I support your local journalism with my hard-earned dollars? I mean, this is the question that we're answering right now. And let's imagine that you answer like lots of journalists do, and I'm not picking on journalists because I'm one of them. In fact, I'm a super fan, but let's imagine that you answer this way. Why? Why? Because our reporting has won 7 AP awards, and we are the foremost newspaper in our region. And you just start to list all of the amazingness about your organization. And I want you to kind of put yourself in the position of the reader. That's kind of arrogant. You're using insider language. I mean, WTF is the AP anyway. If you're not on this call right now, do you really know what the AP is? I mean, there's a small percentage of people that really understand that. And so when you're doing that, that might not be the most appropriate reason or that might not be the most appropriate answer if you really want to garner support. Or let's try another answer that happens all the time. First Amendment, hashtag First Amendment. True, the First Amendment is awesome. and it's necessary, and it is a foundation of our democracy. But have you watched cable TV lately and seen what the folks are doing with the First Amendment these days? You're going to find a very thin slice of your readers that are going to support you because First Amendment. But again, if you want to widen the tent and be appealing to a larger, broader scope of your audience, you have to have a better answer to that. The First Amendment can be part of your answer. It absolutely should be part of your answer, but it can't be the only answer. And then here's another popular choice. If you don't support us, we'll close. And that happens a lot right now, and that is sort of the answer. If we don't get more members, if we don't get more subscribers, we'll close. That reads a little desperate. It's kind of a guilt trip. And can you imagine that the reader in the midst of COVID-19, where they're concerned about their health, they're concerned about their own job, they're concerned about what's happening in their family or with their grandmother or their auntie, can you imagine them saying, well, who cares? That's your problem. And lots of them probably do. So let's think about another way to answer that question. So what if your answer sounded a little bit like this? And this is the way, and this next slide, this is how we answer that question. We say our community deserves to hear the whole story. We uncover through our journalism effective responses to problems that hold us back from our true potential. And in supporting us, you help us guide our community to a better future. And the idea here is that we're moving beyond this narrative around scarcity or things that are terrible or things that are wrong, and we're helping the reader at that point become part of the effort. We're inviting them into a team. We're inviting them into a group that shares values and can be together in this, and can be together in their local news journey. So the big, huge answer is on the next slide, and that is that you are not the hero. This is just absolutely critical. And it's really hard for folks in our industry sometimes, myself included, to take ourselves out of the position, because though journalists and journalism is often heroic, that's not your role in this instance. When you're bringing people along and into your membership program, it's just not your role to tell them how heroic you are, and that is the reason why they should support you. You really just don't get to declare yourself the hero or the savior for the local news industry in your community. They have to decide that. You don't want to, it's kind of like giving yourself a nickname. You just really don't want to be that person that gives yourself a nickname. Somebody has to give that to you. And in this case, let's move to the next section of the presentation as understanding that what's really important to us here is the guide. And if we'll just leave this slide just the way that it sits right now, Yossi, for now, what we're looking at here is the most basic of narrative structures, right? And there's a hero, a protagonist in the story that has a problem typically. And during that problem, with that hero with that problem often will meet a guide, a wise person that provides them with a plan, offers them guidance, and explains to them the stakes of the decisions that they are about to make and calls him or her to action. And in explaining the stakes, they're also helping the heroes see this is what success looks like, and this is what failure looks like. So let's just go ahead and, Yossi, you'll be able to click through, and the slide's animated. So with each click, we'll open a new window. So the hero, which is our reader, our community, is a weak character in most of these narratives. They have problems. They're unsure of the path forward. If you're in the local news environment, I'm sure that we can all begin to start to shape this story, right? And the problem that they have is very specific to them. It's very specific to their community, and it's not universal, but it is definitely there, and it's definable, and you can talk about it, and it is faced by the community. And your role now, this is you. They meet this guide, and this guide is a strong character. The hero is the weak character, the guide is the strong character, and this is us, right? And what's really important about this is that the guide is competent There are things that they do that demonstrate their competence, and they are empathetic. They want to understand the hero. They want to understand that character, and they feel what that character is feeling. This guide, she listens, she seeks to understand and to learn his weaknesses. We want to learn more about that hero so that we can, next step, provide them with a plan. The idea is that the guide has a way. They are wise enough to be able to show the hero a way through this process. And so they're going to show a way past the problem, including steps, benefits, and pitfalls. There are things that now we start to shape this story. And what's happening is you, Obi-Wan Kenobi, are presenting Luke Skywalker with a way to defeat the Empire. And this is how this narrative is. You can kind of place this out. This is how this works, right? And then as they're providing that plan, what is really critical here is that you explain the stakes. What happens if the hero fails to act? What happens, what is stood to lose? And what does success look like? And what does failure look like? And so this is, again, everyone on this call is an expert in story and narrative. So this is really a natural place for an industry like ours to go, because we do this all the time. We unpack this with our sources and through our reporting every single day. So let's move to the next slide, and then we'll actually put local news in the middle of this, right? So this is how Richland Source explains the value of our solutions journalism work to our community. So the hero, we'll do a click and that'll open up that next thing. The hero is the person or the organization that cares deeply about the Mansfield area. Mansfield, Ohio is where our headquarters are and where we do most of our reporting. And that hero has a problem, right? The news about their city, they feel like it's unbalanced. They feel like it's negative and problem focused. It damages, they might have this feeling that this sort of problem focused news, it damages civic life. Maybe it hurts growth. There's really no connection. Perhaps the corporate owned news structure is, the connection with the community has been lost, and they really just don't even know who are these people that write these stories about this town, and they feel like they don't understand it. So then they meet us, right? Competent and empathetic reporters and staff who help them see ways to address tough social problems. So we're using our skills. They know us, and they meet us, and they're like, hey, we tell them, hey, we're really interested in this. This is something that we love to do. We do it every day, and we really want to help you understand your community in a different way, and perhaps show you and introduce you to solutions to the problems that the community is facing. So we start to provide them with a plan, right? And we start to introduce them to this, hey, we know you, we share this problem. That we're competent, that we're skilled, we already have this relationship that we're developing. So what if we built an independent, locally funded, sustainable newsroom that tells the whole story of our community and focuses on solutions? Wouldn't that be a great plan? I mean, that could be a way forward for us to combat this problem. And now it's really critical that we start to explain the stakes, right? This is on us, and this is on everybody on this call. We need the hero, the funder, the member, the contributor, the donor. We need them to enable this work to happen. We need them to help us build this independent newsroom and to chart a new path forward to news. Now, remember, this is really critical. You start to move them into an aspirational mindset. You start to give them something that they can see that is a better future. We're now moving beyond the fact that we have a problem. We know and understand what that problem is. Now we're trying to invite them into a story arc where they see success and they really can understand that there is a better way forward. And then here's where we have to introduce them to the stakes, right? First, we need to show them success, and that is the hero and his city are better informed. They're thinking about solutions and they're moving forward, right? Or we throw them back and we introduce and remind them of what failure looks like, right? The city's story is at risk. The community's story is at risk. We don't have, there's no local control. We're back to the lowest common denominator of crime, drugs, and blood that drive clicks and drive readership and drive viewership, but put us back into that cycle of that sort of spin cycle of negativity. So again, again, we're just using the exact same narrative structure that can be applied to Star Wars, and we're introducing it to local news. And we're just saying, we're the Obi-Wan Kenobi, and if you can think of your community as Luke Skywalker, you just kind of walk them through this narrative, and the only way that you can do this is to do it together. So I'm at this point in time super open for questions if you've got those, because this is kind of a way for us, this is how we explain to our audience where we are and how we move through that story. But I'm super open to answer any questions that folks have.
Any questions for Jay?
There's a bit of a lag, I think, in the chat, so I'll take a moment.
Okay. Yeah, no problem.
Can I prime the pump, maybe, Jay, and just start with
yeah,
I love
the
framing. Joseph Campbell is very happy right now somewhere. Are you?
Right.
I assume you didn't or did you come, full born with this at your publication, or was it trial and error? How did you come to this?
We need to give full credit to this, we read a book called Building a Story Brand by a guy named Donald Miller. It's a marketing book. It's about helping to understand this, and he really helped us understand through that book how we wanted to position ourselves. I think we were doing it somewhat accidentally, Rodney. I mean, we've always been extraordinarily values-driven and mission-driven organization. But once we began to shape our story into this narrative, it gave us discipline in terms of the way that we talked about ourselves, because we would find ourselves slipping into aren't we the heroic journalists, and shouldn't you just pay us because we're awesome narrative. And this has given us this discipline to really see ourselves in the role that which our community wants us to play. And they tell us that over and over again, which role they want us to play. They want us to guide them. They recognize that there's some heroism in it, but this really helped us find our way there. So much so that our internal agency, we went through complete certifications training on this methodology to help our car dealers and our refrigerator repair people go through this exact same thing for their businesses. So we're really it really has become kind of part of the company's DNA.
I think we've got two questions for Jay now. The first is from Kim. How did you define the steps to this journey that you just have on the screen? And then the second question is from Steve, who wants to know, what is your biggest surprise in the local response to telling your story?
So tell me that first question again. I missed it.
How did you define, Kim asked, how did you define these steps? And I think, and Kim, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're pointing to the steps in that sort of journey that you had on the screen a few minutes ago.
So in our work as a story brand agency, this is the path that we follow. It's kind of the architecture of how we start to tease out and uncover the individual story for a particular company that we're working with. What you're seeing this happen here is that this is our story as a journalism organization, but it's applicable to anything else. And so we use this and then train other people on how to do this as well.
And I would guess maybe the problem that you have there, was that revealed through audience research or through sort of casual conversations with your community members, that they found that the journalism was balanced? And so how did you uncover those problems to solve?
That's a great question, because before we were founded, I mean, before we ever published we ever went live with the site, we were founded based on audience research, where we were walking around and literally surveying. I guess it's something between a survey and a focus group, because we were kind of walking up to people on the street and just saying, listen, talk to us about the media environment in our community and whether you think it's constructive or unconstructive, and we would ask follow-up questions about what that was. And what kept coming back to us was that we just kept the story that we were telling about Mansfield in North Central Ohio through the legacy media organizations was selling, right? But it was really only a very thin slice of what the whole story of the community was. And in our journey, you know, there is a little serendipity in here. You can plan for a lot of stuff, but and everyone here on the call, you should plan and plan and plan and work the systems that Ariel and the team are giving you. But when serendipity happens, you know, you should pay attention to it. And that's when we were trying to figure out what we called the kind of journalism we did or wanted to do. That was when we found the Solutions Journalism Network, and we sort of realized, oh my gosh, these are our people. And that doesn't mean that Sojo work is for everybody. If you're doing really hard-boiled investigative work where you're holding power to account all day long, and like that is what you're doing, then your story won't be the same as ours. It'll be different, but your role in it will be the same. Your role will be the guide, and your hero, the way that you define your hero will have to be different. The problem, you know, that they will be facing will be different, but your role will always be this strong, empathetic, competent character, and that'll be the guide.
And the question from Steve, your biggest surprise and local response to your story?
I mean, that people really resonated, that it resonated, honest to God. I mean, you know, when you write the thing or you sit there and you're pushing out a thing that they're unfamiliar with, which is this really community-focused newsroom that leans really deep into engagement, that publishes this, you know, these stories about, you know, that are solutions-focused, that really, you know, that says we want to do journalism with people instead of to them whenever possible. I mean, like, but when people resonate with that, I think that, honest to God, we're surprised. I think we're surprised by that all the time, you know, like, because we sort of feel like we're kind of, you know, weirdos out there, and that has always been something that matters. But I will say that to answer that also was, whenever someone becomes a member, we ask them a question when at the point of transaction, we ask them, why did you become a member? So like they're entering their credit card right at that moment, and we ask them, why did you become a member? And over and over and over and over and over again, they tell us unsolicited that they love the attitude and the way that we are community focused. You know, so they reinforce these data driven thrusts or thematic thrusts in the way that we present ourselves to the community. They reinforce that matters to them.
Thanks. We're gonna move on to a bit of a process of telling your story, and then we'll get to some more of these questions for Jay. At the end, we'll have another block for questions. And just as a reminder, we are trying to sort of serve the whole group. So if we're getting a lot of questions from one person, we're probably not going to get to all of those, because we are trying to make sure that everybody who has questions has a chance to ask them. While Jay was speaking, I went through and answered a number of the questions that had come in writing. So if you asked a question earlier, you might find an answer there in the question and answer section as well. So the next part of this presentation will be a bit shorter, and it's about how to identify your value proposition. A value proposition helps your organization define what you stand for consistently and clearly, decide what not to do when you can't do it all, articulate why people should choose you over other organizations potentially, distinguish yourself from both your competitors and your collaborators, develop a brand strategy, and hire the right people. And you heard a lot of that right now from the process that Jay went through. And the story branding process is one way to identify your value proposition. We'll take you through another today. Organizations with membership usually have two different value propositions, because you have a value proposition for every product that your newsroom creates. The newsroom value proposition guides your organization's overall strategy and direction. It forces you to focus on what you do and what you do well. It articulates what you exist to do and why you're the one who does it best. And then there's the membership value proposition, which articulates how you create value for your members. It articulates your membership social contract, which we spoke about a little bit last week. And I think it's Shafiq who asked the difference between a value proposition and a social contract. The value proposition talks about how you deliver on that social contract with your audience members. Another way that can potentially help you understand the value proposition is that your organization often has a mission statement, and that is aspirational. It says where you seek to go. The value proposition articulates the strategy that you will undertake to achieve that mission. So a value proposition is sort of a strategic statement. A mission statement is an aspirational statement. So the first step that we encourage organizations to go through when they are identifying their value proposition is to think about your strengths. And this can seem really obvious, but sometimes in the sort of bustle of daily journalism production, you can forget about the things that you're really good at. This is particularly true if, say, your organization is under a lot of financial stress, or you are really overtaxed or something like that. It can be easy to really dwell in the things that you wish you were doing better. But a really important thing as you embark on a value proposition exercise is to situate yourself in the places where you are strongest. And so we encourage organizations to do what we call the first, best, only exercise, sort of finish these 3 sentences. And on the next slide, we'll show what it looks like if the Richland source fills out the first, best, only exercise. Jay, do you want to read your answers here?
Yeah, totally. So let's see here. Okay. We are the first ones to deliver a free all digital alternative to legacy news organizations for our community. We are the only ones who consistently engage and invite readers into the journalistic process. And we are the best at delivering a news product which has a solutions orientation and dedication to the community at its center.
Thanks. So I think everybody can sort of hear how these 3 things showed up in the way that the Richland source tells its story and how it situates that story in a really positive light. So this is often the first step of a value proposition process, is identifying first, best, only. And one of the things that we encourage organizations to do, particularly if you're going through a period of immense change, is to bring all your stakeholders into a room together and encourage each person to fill out the first, best, only exercise on their own, and then have each person present their answers to those out and work together until you as a team can settle on one sort of common first, best, only answer that everybody in the organization can sort of get on board with. And this is particularly helpful if you can bring people, if you're in a larger organization that is a bit siloed, this is particularly helpful if you can bring together, say, the person on the sales team and the person on the audience team and the person on the editorial team, because you can kind of get back to this mindset of we're all in this together and we're all trying to get to the same thing at the end of the day, even if we're doing it in different ways because of the position that we have within the company. So this is a good team building exercise and a good value proposition exercise. And so we do it often at MPP. Next slide, Yossi. So the next step of that, there are many ways that you can identify your value proposition. We have tried out a few different ones at MPP. This is the one that we have found the easiest for organizations to use. This is called the Strategizer Ad-lib template, and it helps you write a single sentence that sums up the value proposition for your organization. You would use this no matter what thing you're doing, no matter what value proposition you're articulating. So this can work for articulating your entire newsroom's value proposition. You could use this to articulate the value proposition for a newsletter that you produce. And you can use this to articulate the value proposition for your membership program. So in the resources that will be sent out on Monday, and also in the membership guide audience research value proposition section already, you will find a link to this worksheet. And what you see here is a bunch of blanks and indications of what you'd put in that blank. The first blank is our product or service, and that is going to be your newsroom or your membership program for the purposes of our class. Our newsroom helps, and then user segment. If it's your newsroom value proposition, it's going to be your entire readership. If we're talking about the value proposition for your members, you're going to put loyal readers or members in that user segment box. And then you have the who wants to, and that blank, next blank is user jobs to be done. These are the motivations of your audience members. For the Richland source, you heard them talk about the problems in the community that they wanted to fix. So those are the motivations. Many of you here are probably aware of the jobs to be done framework. If not, we talk about it quite a bit in the membership guide and can get into that. But it's essentially, what are the things that your audience members are hoping that you will do for them? Here is how you're going to speak to that. And then the sort of bottom half of this worksheet is the sort of action. How are you going to meet those motivations? What is it going to look like for you to do that? We also call it the how it works section of this, but it's essentially, what are the things you're going to do to deliver value to either your readers or your loyal audience members? So it sounds a little bit overwhelming when we talk about it out loud, But Jay will talk about his process a little bit later for filling this out. And so you'll hear that it's actually not as confusing as it probably seems. But this, you'll get the link to this worksheet in the Monday resources. Next slide. So those member motivations, that sort of box where it said the jobs to be done, here are some of the motivations that we heard the most often. They wanted a sense of affiliation or belong. And these are the motivations for becoming a member, not reading a publication. They joined because they wanted a sense of affiliation or belonging. They wanted to feel that their concerns were heard by the organization. They wanted to help offer the world something that they thought should exist. They were trusting that organization to advocate for important issues on their behalf. I think we heard that really clearly with the Richland Source. People expected the Richland Source to help make Mansfield a better place to live. They wanted to be connected to other like-minded people. They wanted to be connected to other like-minded organizations. And then many people also said a motivation for membership was ease of use, because a lot of organizations offer things like ad-free browsing or like early sign up for events or things like that as a part of the member experience. So these are not necessarily the motivations you're going to hear, but we're sharing here some of the motivations that came out of audience research that MPP did in conjunction with some newsrooms that had membership programs. Next slide, Yossi. Tips for, did we skip a slide? Yeah, I think we went one too far. Yes, thank you. So the other part of that how it works section, this gets into how you meet the members' needs in a way that you can test and learn from over time. This is the benefits of membership. In other words, these are the services that your membership program provides. And you can test the enthusiasm for them by sort of identifying how often people access these benefits and seeing people actually take you up on the opportunity to participate in these ways. So in those sort of how it works boxes, you might offer the ability to connect with the reporters. It might be exclusive access to certain events or the journalists or to certain sort of like member-only newsletters. Another how it works might be that you give them opportunities to connect with each other through events, or you offer them merchandise or swag to flaunt their support for the organization. So these are sort of things that you are doing for your members. And those are things that could show up in that sort of how it works section of the value proposition. A few tips on identifying your value proposition before we get to hear what it looks like for the Richland Source to do this. Focus on what you do well. That's the whole purpose of starting with the first best only exercise. You should avoid journalism jargon and buzzwords. And you should think about these two things that I talked about earlier that we saw so clearly in the Richland Source presentation. Think about how your membership can be a way to restore something that feels broken in the community in which your members live. And think about how you can connect them and their passions to a shared larger purpose. Your membership program, your membership value proposition should seek to do that. And we'll see now what it looks like for the Richland Source to use the strategizer ad-lib template to articulate their value proposition and then their membership value proposition. Jay, you want to read this one?
Sure, yeah. This was such a great exercise too. I mean, I really enjoyed doing it. Our solutions-focused local journalism helps readers who want to understand the whole story of their community by eliminating the news fatigue caused by just covering what's wrong, and replacing it with a more holistic and nourishing local news experience that helps our city reach its full potential.
Thanks. So this is the newsroom value proposition, talks about the full scale of the Richland Source's work. And now we'll hear their value proposition for their membership program specifically.
Okay, so our membership program helps members who want to make their city a better place by bridging the gap between them and the newsroom that covers their lives, and by forming a vital partnership that fosters trust, togetherness, and growth through community-funded journalism.
Great. Thanks. And next slide, Yossi. And I think I bring back up on the screen here that sort of statement that Jay shared in his presentation. And I bring that up here because I want to offer the contrast. So the value proposition that you just heard Jay read, the two value propositions you just heard read, these are a little bit stiff. You're using a template. That's because these are internal sort of North Stars. You don't write your value proposition using the template and then publish that. You use that value proposition statement as sort of the internal guiding document for your organization to make decisions on what you're going to invest in editorially. Maybe you're going to use it as a sort of basis for writing membership appeals to ask people to join. But the important thing to sort of understand is the value proposition is a strategy statement that is put in place for your team. And then you use your superior wordsmithing skills as journalists to write a statement that is really a rallying cry for your community members, like you see on the screen here. What I have on the screen now looks a little bit different than what Jay just read out loud, but the underlying purpose is the same. It just sounds like something that's a little bit more inspirational to join maybe than what he read before, which was sort of an internal team statement in many ways. The other thing to call out in this statement that we're looking at on the screen is the use of "are" and "we." A lot of news organizations hold themselves at arm's length from their communities, and they talk about them as "you" and "us." And what I really love about the way Richland Source talks about its work is that they situate themselves in all of their language, the pronouns that they choose to use, they situate themselves within the community that they exist to serve. And that's especially important at a local news level, I think, but important for any journalism organization serving any audience is to get comfortable with situating yourself within the audience that you exist to serve. And last part of this today, we wanted to show an example of what it looks like for the Richland Source to act on its value proposition in its work. So Jay, you want to talk a little bit about this?
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to talk about like how I experienced this exercise as I was going through it, because I did it. I just did it just like all of you will do it. And I was struck by the importance of the order in which you do these things. One seemed to build on the other. You know, the first only best exercise, you know, really just was me like working my way through, okay, we were the first people to do this, we're the only people to do this, and we're really, really good at this, right? And then I move into this newsroom value proposition, which is like, as you said, Ariel, we're talking about the entire scope of the work. And then we narrow down into this membership value proposition. And what was interesting to me as I was kind of observing myself doing this is that the first two are really money agnostic, right? I mean, you're the first, you're the only, you're the best, and your overall newsroom value proposition really doesn't have a lot to do with money. They are really about the organization's values and how they show up in the world. You do your reporting the way that you do your reporting. It's not really dependent on, you're not asking anyone for money. These are just your values. This is how you do your work. The last one, your membership value proposition, is about inviting people to align with and support those values with their money, time, and effort. And what was really interesting to me is if I imagined myself reversing the order and doing the membership value proposition first, well, it risks sort of subverting the organizational values in pursuit of dollars. You know, like, what could I do that would make this the most successful? You know, what could I do? You know, if I'm thinking there first, then my values or the things that are important to us become flexible, and then they become less authentic, right? If your values are flexible, they're really not that authentic. And so it was really important. It was really important to me, the order, as I discovered myself doing this, and then this idea that the market should find your values worth investing in. You know, that they should be important enough to invest in. And if they're not, right, if the market's not responding to those values, you may need to reconsider who you're talking to. And if you have product market fit, you might not. So here's an example, though, of sort of how we articulate and try to put that into action, right? So crime coverage on the Source. The standard operating procedure for generations in the newspaper business is rooted in some very clear facts. Crime coverage sells. It sells on the Richland Source. If we cover a major crime or a felony crime and we choose to cover that, that it's very predictable. It's going to drive a lot of eyeballs. It's also a fact that crime is a part of any community story, and therefore it's reportable, and it's our responsibility to make sure that our community knows if there is a danger that they need to be responding to, or they need to know these kinds of things. But also a fact, in the third bullet point, is that crime of all types occupy a disproportionate mind share for local media. And this can be shown through like a really simple data point. And this is one of the ways that we use it to drive, to sort of guide our crime coverage. Our approach is to tie the percent of coverage more closely to the actual crime rate in the community. So for an example, the crime rate in and around Richland County, Ohio is roughly, 7%. And that means that, at any given point in time, 7% of the population is involved in the criminal justice system. If you double that number and take it to 14 or 15%, you're still roughly half the number of what the traditional kind of conventional wisdom is for newspaper coverage. So what we try to do is tell our audience and then live out those values that, look, we are going to cover crime, but we're not going to live off the bodies of the wounded and the damaged. If you're involved in the criminal justice system, there are things in your life that are, things that happen that we can't know about that put you in that situation, whether you're a victim or a perpetrator. We can live off that, or we can cover it and tell you what you need to know and try to look at more solutions focused ways that our community could respond to this thing. We could be a convener for difficult discussions around policing. We can be a place where people can trust us to tell them what they need to know, but not exploit the pain and suffering of their community. And so what we try to do is tie that more closely to the actual crime rate. And that, in doing that, that gives us the freedom to cover different things. And therefore to have that, to like make real that more holistic and nourishing news coverage that we're telling them that we are doing. So for us, it's all about making sure that the audience knows what we tell them that they're going to do, but then also has evidence that they can check us on. And sometimes they do check us. And that's really, that to us is super important, because negative feedback from your audience is just as important as positive feedback. In fact, it's probably more important. And then the way that you respond to that, and the way that we respond to that negative feedback or that survey, when we're asking them questions, it's very important for us to be able to hear that information, not get defensive, take it in, process it, and then come back out to them with an answer that, while they don't always like the answer, they feel like they can see that we have taken a moment to think about it and process it and value their feedback. So this is just sort of one way that we try that it shows up in our coverage on a day-to-day.
And that gets to that point that we made earlier about, you don't conduct audience research to just collect praise from your audience members. You
Right.
conduct audience research to get the kind of feedback that you can act on and sort of iterate on. I want to get two more questions in front of you that came in earlier. One question was from Preston, who wanted to know how you shared your story among your readers and your audience members. Like, how did you get it out there? And then the other question that sort of came from V and also David Goodwin is, what's your membership? Like, how many members do you have? How does that compare to the sort of size of the Mansfield market? Where do your audience members meet you? And how does that compare to the Mansfield News Journal, which I guess is the legacy publication in town? Yeah.
So, okay, so let's start with, how did we tell our story? Well, I think the answer is relentlessly, right? I mean, you have to be willing to, we leaned into the our and we pronouns a lot. And we talked to, and we just talked about, this is why we're here. This is what we're doing. This is what our mission is. This is what we're trying to do. When we would make a mistake or we would have an error in our coverage, we would try to be very accountable for that error. We pre-COVID, we did tons of in-person events. Some of them fun, some of them newsy, but we tried to make the tagline, doing journalism with people instead of to them whenever possible. We tried to make that real for people. We met them in real life, which is critical, especially in today's environment. There are ways that you can do this through your newsletters. Go ahead and take a paragraph and just be a human being for a minute. For us, a lot of over time, a lot of this has been being human beings. with our audience, for them to get to know us. My audience knows what music I listen to. They understand, they understand the sports that I care about. They probably know, I care about professional cycling, of all weird nerdy sports. Yossi, I see you. But they know that I like that sport. And so it's this idea of, it's okay to be a human being with this audience, because it makes you a little bit more three-dimensional, and it makes membership easier. If they like you, it's easier for them to be in community with you. We're closing in. I mean, we're tantalizingly close to 1,000 members right now, which, in a small rural market, we feel pretty good about that. Membership has doubled this year in 12 months. So we're up from about 500 to very nearly 1,000. Our goal is to hit 1,000 by the end of the calendar year. We're well on track for that. How we compare with the News Journal, I don't exactly know. Gannett doesn't share their numbers with me, unsurprisingly. But I think what we take, and I think everyone in this call can look at this, if you're competing with a legacy news organization, your advantage is that you are corporate. I mean, the decisions come from your office and your desk, or your small team. You can decide what you want to do, and I think that's just this incredible movement advantage and agility advantage that you have. And we've done everything we can to leverage that agility advantage to be top of mind with our audience. Because if they don't come to us to read the news, then we can't ask them to become a member. And so, to give you sort of an example, right, like today, there's a high school girls soccer team that is playing for a state championship in 28 minutes. The pregame event will start live on Facebook, on the Richland Source Facebook page. We will do a pregame event, and we are collaborating with a competitor that is a video production company and a live streaming company. We're collaborating with that competitor to put on this pregame event, and we're broadcasting it on both of our Facebook pages for the benefit of this high school girls soccer team. As far as I know, Gannett's not doing any of that. And that is and that is what will drive membership. And oh, by the way, we have a 50% off membership coupon code that's tied to this girls state soccer championship run, that we've tied to that and then inserted into all of our newsletters, so that they see that we see them. As long as they keep winning, people keep saving on membership. So it's just these little things that you can tie in that make your audience understand that you do see them. Like, you care about this soccer team that's, hopefully, fingers crossed, go Rams, going to win a state championship.
Great. And there is one other element to that question, which is they were curious if you would be open to sharing what percentage of your revenue is coming from membership at this point in time.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to share that. And I thought you guys might ask. We're closing in on 15% of revenues coming from membership right now.
And that brand studio. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
And if you count our newsroom partnership program, which is corporate membership, that number climbs up toward 33%.
That's great. That's really a meaningful slice of revenue coming from that. And then this sort of skill at telling your story has also become its own revenue stream through the Source Brand Studio as well, right? Excellent.
Yeah, it has. Yeah, it has.
Great. Thank you, everybody. I think that's where we'll have to close out on questions for the week. We will have office hours next week where I can get into much more specific audience revenue questions for folks. So people start to get into questions that are very specific to their communities. We can definitely get into that in office hours next week, and Yossi will send signups. And we'll give a little bit more time to talk about audience research in next week's session. Last thing to mention, office hours this week, 2 assignments for this week. One is to draft your newsroom value proposition using the Strategizer AdLib template. And if you have a membership program already, take a stab at using that template to write a value prop for your membership program, or maybe imagine what your membership program will look like and try writing a value prop for that. This is about sort of getting into the habit of thinking about jobs to be done and member motivations for articulating your strategy. Bonus assignment, if you're an overachiever, I'd love for some people to come to next week's class with a question that they have about their members or potential members and how you might use audience research to answer that question. I'd love to hear if you think that a survey or focus group or interview is the right way, and maybe like 3 or 4 questions that you might ask them in that survey or focus group or interview to figure out the answers to that question you have about your audience that will help you design a more impactful membership program. Yossi will send the post-session slides, which are heavily linked up. We will send the slides that came up in the chat. We will send even more links that we didn't share today. And again, we're doing we're really covering a lot of ground rather than going deep on any one thing, because pretty much all of this is documented in the membership guide. So our goal here is to give you a good sense of everything that the membership guide can sort of help you dig in on, rather than only touch 1 or 2 topics. So I know we went through a lot. I know there was a lot on the slides, but we're trying to make the information as accessible as possible. After Rodney even shared a transcript last week, which was great. I didn't even know that was something we could do so quickly. Do you have any questions specifically about assignments or office hours, like logistical questions?
And just one more logistical note. I know we've repeated this a couple times, but bears repeating. That email will come from membership@lenfestinstitute.org. So check your spam, add it to safe senders. And if you have any trouble or questions, just feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm joseph@lenfestinstitute.org.
Thank you, everybody. I apologize for going a couple minutes over, but thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for such great questions. I hope you're really amped to go back to your newsroom and start asking your audience members all kinds of questions. I think Jay's presentation really underscored how enjoyable and like fulfilling it can be to find that connection point with your audience members. And that was what we hope you sort of take away from seeing these in conjunction. Thank you, everybody. And more on Monday morning, and hope to see some of you in office hours. Thanks to those who joined us this week.
See everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Jay.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
thanks for having me. Yeah, it's my pleasure. This was great.